most everybody in the room owns a radio set. I would say 99% of all the homes in the United States have not only one radio set. How many of you own 2 radio sets? How many of you own 3 radio sets? How many of you own 4 radio sets? Most households in the United States own 5 radio sets. Most households, in terms of, again, the car radio, the one that's in the kitchen, the one that's in the basement, each one of the children have a radio. There's probably a radio in some drawer that no one's listened to in a long, long time. But if you count up the number of radios, it's really quite impressive, the availability of the number of radios. And when it comes around to measuring the number of people who are listening to radio from a measurement services point of view, it is really quite difficult because television you sit down and generally watch, and it becomes a piece of equipment that you need to go to. The radio is just kind of everywhere, and you kind of walk from one setting where radio is occurring to another setting. So you listen to it in the morning as you're getting up, and then you go out in your car, and the drive times, as they refer to them, are the major times that people listen in the United States to radio, is when they're driving to work and when they're coming home. Now, if we're asking people what they listened to yesterday, they've got to recall back as, where were all those radio sets? A lot of people listen to radio at work while they're doing their work. So if you count the number of radios in your life, you will find that generally speaking about at least a half dozen radio sets across your little lifestyle on a day-to-day kind of basis. So Arbitron is the major measurement service in the radio industry. Lots of people have heard about Nielsen television rating services, which is in the television side of the fence, and we are kind of share that market in terms of providing measurement data for the television services. But in radio, Arbitron is the major book. We are probably providing most of the radio stations with most of their ratings that they receive. Let's talk about television for a little while. Think about Sunday, think about yesterday, and the amount of television that you watched, the number of hours of television. Now, I'm going to slow down here for a second. I want you to kind of think about it. You watched probably some news, I would think. You might have watched a sports show. You might have watched some of the regular kind of programming. Yesterday was Sunday, so we didn't have a chance to watch the soaps or the early morning kind of news shows. But Sunday morning has some of the best news programming on, so you might have watched that, some of the public affairs programs. So while I've talked, I hope you got a handle on the number of hours that you watch. Notice I'm not saying minutes, because I'm going to bet everybody watched at least an hour of television. Anybody not watch more than an hour worth of television? 1, 2, 3, 4 people. 5, 6. Watch less than an hour worth of television. This is interesting. Most people on a day-to-day kind of basis are looking at their television sets up to a half dozen hours a day. Most television sets in the United States are viewed about more than 40 hours per week. There's an interesting kind of correlation between age, which will account for why you all look so little at television, and television viewing. Now, if I had a blackboard, I would draw this for you, so you'll just have to go with a kind of a picture, but I'm going to draw a curve in terms of the amount of viewing related to your age. Needless to say, when you're born, you don't watch too much television, right? But it doesn't take too long before you are camped out in front of the television set to look at early childhood programs, the cartoons. A lot of parents, young parents, use television as a babysitter. So even without full comprehension of the language or whatever, the child is sitting there watching the pictures. So television viewing takes off early in your lives. And some marvelous television occurs really for children. It will peak, our television viewing for our entire life will peak right around the age of 12. Between 12 and 13 years of age is the maximum number of television hours that a child will watch in the United States. This will be up to 12 hours a day. 10 to 12 hours of television a day. Now you got to go back in time and think about when you were 11, or 12 and 13 years of age. What do you do with your life? My daughter, who is in this age bracket, just discovered boys about 6 months ago, and her television viewing is beginning to shift, as a matter of fact. So this is a time when you're really not fully dating, but you kind of want to. But television has been a major part of your life, and so you are consuming an awful lot of it. But generally, about the early teenage years, you discover the other sex, and you find what else you can do with your life. So television viewing begins to drop off. The lowest viewing point occurs in the early 20s. Generally, you're deeply involved in higher education in this particular group, or you're starting off with your career, you've just got yourself married, you're just absolutely wrapped up and doing other things besides sitting in front of the television. So some of the lowest viewing occurs at that particular time in our lives. And then we start having babies ourselves, right? And we begin camping our own children out in front of the television, and our own viewing as a parent now begins to pick up. And we'll actually kind of plateau during our 30s, and we will watch kind of a consistent amount of television unless there is some kind of lifestyle shift, at which time we'll watch a lot more. But it will generally stay fairly at a steady level until we reach retirement age, at which time our television viewing will skyrocket almost up to the maximum it was when we were 12 or 13, until our eyes go, and then it begins to drop off again. So again, when I asked how many hours of television you all watched, it's not unusual, given your qualifications and your age brackets, that you don't watch that much television. But a lot of people watch a lot of television. A lot of people are, quite frankly, very concerned about the number of hours that is being devoted to television viewing. We spend a lot of time figuring out how many hours people are watching, what they're particularly watching. The major reason that we're doing this is because the advertising industry is very, very interested in getting their messages out. I want to ask you how many advertisements you think you saw yesterday. Now let me rephrase this. How many advertisements were you exposed to yesterday? How many people would say? 10. 10 advertisements. All forms. Television, radio, newspapers. All forms of billboards. 100. How many people would say they were exposed to 100? How many people would say more than 100? How many people would say more than 1,000?